Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Stories. It's such a treat to have Alison Gold with us this afternoon to share some of her sacred stories and some of her sacred questions as well. We'll get into those. As per usual, I'm going to start with an opening blessing before Alison introduces herself. This is a blessing I wrote a few days ago. I woke up early in the morning with the birdies, and this kind of flowed through my spirit. May the stirrings of our hearts call us into sacred dialogue, rousing spirit, beckoning inward. May spring's sweet breath shape a circle between us, hallowed whispers of kindred touch, stretching among fellow travelers. Holding each soul a compassionate witness to wisdom and tender wounds. May I gracefully receive each of these companions, cradling my heart in sanctuary. May my tread upon soft earth be nimble when yours is heavy. May your radiance, a soft lantern, cast a devoted glow when I dim. My luminous neighbor across this hallowed field, may horizons ever summon us. Sacred conversation, captivating promise, elevating delight, hearkening divine invitation. So I was telling Alison before we recorded that after I recorded the last conversation, I hung up and was like, I cannot believe I get to do this with my life. It's so amazing. And I think that one of the things that I find so powerful is that in listening to others' stories, we hear our own. And I love the idea of being able to provide nourishment for our communities through the sharing of stories. So I'm going to start with a quote by Parker Palmer to kind of set this sacred container, and then we'll kind of dive into our conversation. We have to create a different atmosphere for the soul to find its voice. Quiet, inviting, and trustworthy spaces. Alison, you may know that one already. I'm seeing some nodding over there. I love it. So I love to invite my guests to introduce themselves. So many ways we can do that. And I'll just let you take it away. Just share a little bit about yourself with our listeners.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you,
Jessica.
One of the things that I feel like we have to get out in the open is we've known each other quite a long time.
I know, yes. Do you want to share a little bit of like the reconnection that we had? Because it's so
fun. So what's very funny is Jessica and I went to high school together. And we were friendly, but we weren't particularly close friends. And we played in orchestra together and had some.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about orchestra. Yes. And we had freshman year AP history together.
Yes.
Which kicked my butt. I remember that class very well.
My intro to Eurocentrism.
Yes.
Never be forgotten. So in terms of introductions are always such a hard thing to do, especially when you're reconnecting with someone you already know. But I think at this point in my life, I sort of ascribe to the term, I'm an anthropologist, which is something that I've taken on as a mantle because anthropology is the study of humans and how our cultures and our beings have evolved over time. And I do a lot of work that I call applied anthropology, which is really helping folks trying to solve big, complex social problems like racism, like genocide, like poverty, understand the problems that they're trying to solve in the first place. I think in American culture, we spend a lot of time focusing on the future and the present, and not a lot of time really trying to interrogate and gain a great understanding of like how this moment came to be. And then, once sort of we have an understanding of that, using that as a jumping off point to sort of hypothesize, like, what will it take to do this differently and make the world look different than it does right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think, anthropologist is probably the best way to describe it. And, we're all so many things. I think about it, it's like I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm, a member of my community, and a neighbor, and I'm a swimmer, although I haven't been able to swim in quite some time because the pools have all been closed.
Right.
And one of the things that I think reconnected us so many years later is I'm a really, really avid traveler. And travel is a place that, for me, has been a profound space for learning, reflection, and sort of figuring out where I need to go next. My personal hypotheses.
Yeah. I'm so struck as you're talking, Alison, by the way that you shape the understanding of anthropology vis-a-vis community, and how it's oh my gosh, what's the word? I'm losing it. When something is a microcosm of something bigger, and I'm forgetting the word right now, whatever. So the way that is reflected in our own personal growth journeys, right? Like understanding the past, sitting in the present, and then kind of thinking about how we shape the future, both personally and then communally. I like the reflection in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell if it's that notion of like, the mirroring of all that is because I have like one framework and thinking in my mind, or if it's actually just like, oh, I've cracked the code and everything has the same model.
Yeah,
I would think probably it's a little bit of both at sometimes.
Right,
but,
right.
But I do think that, I'm a big fan of the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, and their book, Emergent Strategy, talks about this. One of the concepts of emergence is small is good, small is all, small is a reflection of what is larger. Yeah. And I think that that is very true in how we individually lead our lives, and how that contributes to society as a whole, to our community, to our family.
Yeah.
It's all very connected for me in terms of that. It's an ongoing joke with my significant other. He once asked me if I had any friends who I didn't do work with, and I said, why would I?
It is all connected. Yeah. I mean, I think about that for myself too, like my professional life and my romantic life and my social life and my own personal spiritual life, right? All of it. So this is a perfect segue. So, oh goodness, there's so many stories that make up our lives, right? So it's hard to, choose just one. But I'd love to invite you to share a sacred story from your life, or even to push back on that in some way. We talked about that conversation. And then maybe we'll see where that takes us if we want to zoom out more into the communal space too.
Sure. I mean, I have teased you throughout the process of getting ready for this conversation that sacred isn't really a term I use.
Yeah.
It's making me want to sort of ask the question, like, why? What is it about that word that doesn't land for me?
Yeah.
But I do feel as though that I have like a spiritual practice and connection in the world. And there are many different facets of it. Part of it has been a rediscovery of aspects of Judaism that are aligned very much with like my love of both sort of like cultural tradition, but then also the social justice elements of it. Part of it has been something that even from a young age I really felt, which was a connection with nature.
Yeah.
and being in, just, it's one of the greatest things about growing up in the United States. And if you have the privilege to actually travel around to many parts of the United States, is just like the vast diversity of the landscape, the ability to like actually go on a backpacking trip where you can spend 5 days and only see the people you're traveling with. And I was really fortunate to have those types of opportunities, and definitely remember, like, big backpack on my back, 15 years old, going up a hill that was really, steep, and it being a really awful, like, in the moment experience, and that ability almost to tap into that like meditative nature of it, and that recognition of the beauty of the land, the environment around me. And then I think that that is also transferred in just like sheer curiosity and the ability that I've had to travel to other parts of the world and experience other cultures. And for me, I think a lot of the practice of the spiritual is about inquiry, and is about that sort of, how are you finding greater alignment with what I value, and what's important to me in the world, and how I am spending my time. And it's something I think about a lot. And lots of people have had a lot of time recently to think about how they're spending their time, and to spend their time differently, I think. And sort of the thing that brought you and I back together after many years of sort of not having seen each other, and then the joys of Facebook connecting us, was I had taken a job, and right now I live in Washington, D.C., but at the time I was living in Oakland, California. And I had a job that I was very unhappy in, and just knew from very early on in it, it wasn't set up right for me to be successful. And then, did the thing that I've often done in my life, which is, well, I'll stick it out for 2 years and I'll make the best of the situation. And just really found I was so unhappy. I wasn't even able to make the best of the situation in a lot of circumstances. And I was fortunate to work with a wonderful coach in the last 6 months of the time I was doing that, who, one of the things that as an anthropologist I'm very much about is like asking good questions. And I can't say enough of, if you find the right coach, they ask you the questions that I only half jokingly refer to as the "oh shit" questions.
Virtual toast to amazing mentors. It's such a gift.
And I was working with someone who a woman named Melissa Marr, who's still a coach, and I highly recommend her if she's the right fit for you, and who really would call me on some of my built-in assumptions and things that I had become hardened to. And about 2 months into the period of time that we were working together, and I knew from the get-go that one of my goals was to sort of extricate myself from this job situation. It just really came to me from all these questions she's been asking that my next step was not to jump to the next job. I'd had a pattern. I'd been at that point working for 16 years. I had followed a path that, truthfully, like, society ingrains in people who are middle class and high achieving, and which is that you should keep going for the next better job. And I had done that, and some of those jobs had been amazing, and some of my life had been amazing, and some of it had been really unhappy. And not in like the deepest, darkest way, but just like misaligned with like the person I was and am. And this was clearly one of those times, and it was like, how could I actually reset that set of expectations? And I was fortunate I had a bunch of savings in the bank, and I just came back to her and I said, I think I've had this really important realization that I'm not supposed to look for my next job. I'm supposed to take some time off and really reflect on these core questions that I have about my life. And the best place I know for me to reflect has always been when I've been traveling.
Yeah.
And she was so excited, which was very validating. And then I started I shared it with my parents, and they were really excited, which for me means a lot. I know it doesn't for everyone.
No, I was gonna, gosh, I have so many things even just now. Like, I want to just take a moment to allow the weight of courage that it takes to say, you know what, instead of falling into this ingrained path that we've been fed, I'm actually going to step back and travel. I know there have been some times in my life, one in particular was during rabbinical school when I was pretty unhappy and I wanted to take time off. And I did get pushback from a parent, which also for me, like I'm very close to this parent. It was really hard. And I ended up kind of finding my own way. Like I ended up taking less classes and taking summer school and yada, yada. But for you to have the self-knowledge and the courage to say, you know what, I am going to honor this really loud voice inside that says it's not time yet. That's huge. Yeah, it's huge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At the time, it didn't feel courageous. It just felt necessary.
Right.
And and I was fortunate that I think so many people who cared about me saw how unhappy I was, that
Yeah.
like when they heard me wanting to make what sounded like a more positive set of choices, that they were really, really supportive of that, which was great. And so, the next 4 months of work with my coach and, I had a range of other discussions like with friends. And I think, for me, I'm a big believer in the power of emergence. I spent a lot of my life being a person who, sort of bought into the idea that if I put my head down and I just worked harder, the answers would all come to me. And one of the things that was really freeing in my career was when I learned there were other ways of solving problems, and they weren't so reliant on me as an individual coming up with the solution. And in fact, my power could be, and my contribution could be, in asking really good questions of others. And in this situation, I felt like it was an amazing opportunity for me to then start asking some questions of myself.
Yeah.
And by the time I was getting ready to take what ended up being, originally it was supposed to be like a 3.5 month sabbatical, and ended up going on for 7 months.
Funny how that happens, right?
Yeah. Well, and I had 3 questions, and 3 questions were, how do I want to contribute positively to the world? Because my work has always had an orientation of sort of like making the world a better place. The second was, what do I want the rhythm of my life to be? And the third was, where do I consider home? And or maybe it should have been, what do I consider home? And or who do I consider home? All of those could be really good questions, but at the time it was where. And I think one of the things that was so fascinating was I would tell people that, I had this plan, I was going to take this sabbatical, I was going to do this traveling. And my travels were a mix of like more formal types of things, like spending time at a spiritual community in eco-village. And I spent, close to 2 weeks traveling and learning how to cook South Indian food. And, and then more like self-directed, like, 3.5 weeks just traveling through Germany. And I think one of the things that was so interesting is I would tell people and they'd be really excited about the travel part, but their immediate question is like, oh, where are you going to live when you're done?
Right.
What do you plan to do afterwards? I'm like, oh, no. Like, that's literally what this is to help you. I'm going to go and do this, and the answers are going to emerge.
Yeah, this theme keeps coming up in all of my conversations of surrender, of sitting with the questions, of letting things unfurl, of trusting the process, right? And it's interesting when we when our friends and loved ones kind of reflect this like need to know, which is totally a natural human, urge. But yeah, I love that. So these three questions that you shared with us, the how do I want to contribute positively to the world? What do I want the rhythm of my life to be? And where or what or who do I consider home? Did you come up with these questions, Alison, or did your coach generate them for you?
No, I came up with them.
Mm.
I mean, like definitely through conversations with her and with other people, but I think for me, these have kind of come the critical questions of my life.
Yeah.
And, the answer is different today than it was when I set out on sabbatical, than it was when I came back from taking this life sabbatical. And I just want to honor, it was like a particularly like, unique and privileged position to be able to say, oh, I'm going to like drop out of existence for 7 months and just like follow my own path and travel where I want to go to, and to have the support and the resources to do that is a pretty unique and special thing. I don't think it's the only way to do it. And certainly it's something, I think there are ways that even in the rhythms of our daily life, and I've had to figure that out more since I've been back, like having those questions and holding them. And they don't need to be like the front of mind all the time. In fact, I think that falls back into the trap of if I just think really hard on this.
Right. Yeah, it's more about listening. I think actually it's more about listening. And I'm thinking too, if you have a morning practice or a spiritual practice of any kind, like you can make space for these questions too, or to sit with questions of your own that feel compelling.
I'd also offer for people who are less like, for some people that's like going on a run or being on a swim, and for some people it's walking the dog. And I mean, I know for me, stuff clicks when I'm in the shower all the time.
Yes. So many profound thoughts in the shower. Yeah. For me, yeah, on my bike rides. Sometimes even just when I'm cooking breakfast and I'm kind of like zoned out, things will drop in.
And I will say, when I took my sabbatical, it was really interesting how it was like, I remember distinct points of interactions with other people that clarified the answers for me.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, can you share like maybe one example or story from your travels that answered one of these questions that's like, profoundly stayed with you in some way?
Yeah. I mean, one's very quick, and then I'll share a slightly longer one because I've actually shared the other one before. But the first one was, I went to this place called the Findhorn Foundation, which actually I had never heard of before in my life. After I made this decision that I was going to take time off and travel, I went to dinner with like a relatively new friend, and was so excited and was telling her about it. And she's like, where you might want to go? To the Findhorn Foundation. And I was like, what? What is this? And she proceeded to tell me about this like very quirky, interesting, like intentional community in the Highlands of Scotland that's an eco-village. And I went home and I remember looking up on the website, and they have this thing, when you go, the first week you go, you do a particular program that everyone does. And they had this video, and it explained nothing about the program. This woman says, it's like, but if you think you're supposed to be here, then you should be here. And I was like, I think I'm supposed to be here.
Just as an aside, so I now have like a few people in my life who have visited the Findhorn Foundation. It's very much on my radar. I know that I will be there in one part of this lifetime. So just hearing you talk about it gets me all excited.
Yeah, and it's played a profound, that is not the only trip to it. I've gone twice, and the second time it played a profound role in like unlocking some stuff for me also. But they have a game there called the Game of Transformation, which is fascinating. It's a facilitated board game. It's really gets into looking at all these different levels of of yourself, from like the physical to the emotional to the intimate, like, and the facilitator asks you these questions, and I don't remember the exact question, but there was something that came up as we were playing that um, that she said to me, well, when was the last time you can remember being like truly happy?
Mm-hmm.
And I had this vision of right before I moved to California. And I have this group of friends that I've known almost since I moved to DC as a 22-year-old. And just a really nice group of people, like, and now some of them have kids and some have gotten married. And it was October, and we were in one of their backyard, and we had a big fire going and a barbecue. And one of my friends, my friend Glenn, has a daughter, but at the time she was, I want to say, like 3.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, she really likes the music of Andrew W.K. And so we put on an Andrew W.K. song, and there's a picture of me, and there's these beautiful streaming lights, and she and I are dancing to it. And I just remember that moment being so joyful. And it just dawned on me that the times in my adult life I've been happiest, I have been in DC and part of this community of people who I just really connect with and have fun with.
Yeah.
And so that, like, this was less than 2 weeks into being on sabbatical, and like, it just felt like, oh, like, part of it is I keep fighting against that DC is my home.
Yeah.
But DC is my home. It doesn't have to be my only home. And maybe it's a home base, but it's the place that I'm always wanting to come back to. And so that was a great example of sort of like just being asked the right question, and like that space, and like how it just like it clicked in that moment.
Yeah, it drops in.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I heard recently a definition of spirituality as homecoming. Spirituality as homecoming. And I've been sitting with, how we understand home, what it means to come home into ourselves. Who is our home? Where is our home? All the things you've mentioned. So I love that. I love giving us kind of this spacious invitation to sit with homecoming and how we understand that. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a very special place. I was there at the end of November and the beginning of December. And so my first visit, there were approximately 6 hours a day of daylight. And so, the days were really short, but it was also very magical because there aren't a lot of people visiting the community that time of year either. And so you get to know people in like quite an intimate way. And it really is a place of like intimacy and empathy for one another.
How many other folks were there, just so we have a sense?
So the last week of November, there were more people there. I was in a group, I think at that point, it had been 12. But then the following week, my friend, Debbie, who had been the one who suggested going in the first place, said, don't just go for 1 week, stay another week, because like what you go through that first week is very intense, and like give yourself some space. And so they have a program that's called Being in Community. So once you've sort of done the orientation week of it, you can come back and be in community over and over again. And then there's like a whole set of pathways there of other things you can do if you want to stay longer. And that second week, there were only 2 of us. And so it was our focalizer, which is their term, facilitator, and 2 of us. And so we shared a room. We did like these, facilitated activities together, but we also had, like time and space. You have an assigned role within the community, because one of the beliefs there is like work as a form of love in action.
Yes.
The first week I was there, I worked in the kitchens, and that was really great. I loved being able to, I already was a person who loved to cook for others, so being able to cook for like 100 others was really special. And then the second week I actually worked in something I was not as excited about, but ended up being wonderful, which is they call it home care, and it's a mix of kind of housekeeping, and also sort of just like paying attention to like the energy of a space.
Hmm.
And so I just found like that was surprisingly meditative, to be able to like care for a space. And at one point, I just realized like we had this beautiful fireplace and none of the stuff was facing it, so people couldn't really sit around the fireplace. So I moved around a bunch of um, the furniture, and like it was just fun to watch later that day as people discovered it and they're like, this is such a great idea, why wasn't it
Oh,
like it before?
yeah, yeah.
But so there were only two of us in our group. There were other people there, and then there are people who live at Findhorn year round. So,
Uh-huh.
but it was many fewer people, and it was surprisingly warm, which was lovely also.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we could really be outside and enjoy just like how beautiful Scotland is, and just Scotland is quite magical. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, well, I'm excited. Whenever I'm supposed to be there, I will, and I will be asking you lots of questions about it, I'm
Thank
sure.
you.
Um, so I'm interested. So we've been talking kind of about this time in your life a few years ago of sitting with these questions and journeying across the world. How do you feel like the sacred or these questions, or however you want to kind of understand that, are speaking to you right now? Like, where are you feeling personally called or questioned right now?
Yeah. Well, I think the question is of how do I want to contribute positively to the world?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In this moment feels, you know, very front and center for me. Um, so when I came back from sabbatical, I started a consulting practice. It's a very values-driven way of working. I only work on issues that center racial equity, gender equity. I work with different types of institutions. So I've worked with foundations and nonprofits and hospitals and um, medical. I don't know why I work with so many health related things, but I do. um, and doctors, which has been great.
Yeah,
And I like the work that I do. And also, I feel like when I look at the scale of the problems that exist in the world, often when you're a consultant, the work gets smaller. So I'm helping a small group of people do something. And
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
the scale at which they're able, because they're a small group of people, to sort of influence, even if what they have to work with to influence is limited by the capacity of the people. So I was already starting now, sort of entering, I'm nearing my third year of doing this work, of sort of questioning, it's like, how does this get at a level? Because a lot of what I do is actually ask people critical questions and
Yeah,
help them
yeah,
build the processes to learn against them,
yeah.
and to learn as they try new things to help move the world in the direction they want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And which is like feels like sort of what I was called to do.
Yeah,
And that I'm in a unique situation where I feel very comfortable asking uncomfortable questions to people,
mm-hmm.
once I've built a thoughtful relationship with them. Like I trust in that, and I trust in my ability to ask it at a time, and in a way that it has the intended effect of like pushing people's thinking, and have gotten the feedback that that is in fact what I do. um,
Yeah,
Great. And also, you know, right now I think simultaneously I'm of two minds. So one is that my future orientation sees that right now we are having a deeply disruptive moment in some critical systems that have already existed as
yeah,
problems.
yeah.
So we have had profound economic and racial inequity in this country. And, you know, I was just reading this morning that since the middle of March, 40 million people have applied for unemployment, since,
Yeah, staggering. Yeah.
which is a fifth of working adults in the United States. Um, and to me, I look at that and I look at 100,000 people dying of COVID-19 and how it's disproportionately Black and African American people, Latinx people, older people. A term that's often used is vulnerable, but people are only vulnerable because we create systems that enable them to be as much.
Right.
And, you know, my systems, you know, like, let's solve all the world's problems, brain says this is a unique moment. And everyone seems to be in a mindset of triage, of dealing with crisis, and not saying, okay, if these systems do not serve us anymore, what are the new things we need to build?
Yeah.
And that to me feels like the place I would love to be working with people. And also it takes a ton of energy. Yeah. And this is a moment that is, you know, for many people in many different ways, is just like sucking the energy out of us, whether it's looking at the political, whether it's looking at, you know, what we've seen this week that you and I are talking is like us, again, a series of profoundly disturbing and racist incidents against Black people, both by, you know, the state in the form of police violence and by individuals who are other white women who claim to be liberal.
Right.
And so I look at that, and I look at the movement of people who are trying to liberate states, liberate in quotes, and I feel like a profound sucking of energy and pain looking at those issues, and that those are all the types of things that in order to build new systems, we have to both seek to understand, we have to go through the recognition and reconciliation of these things. And we don't have a history of doing that in our country at all. And then at the same time, and I think many people feel this way, I don't feel like I have an avenue to contribute to those types of changes at the moment because of the craziness in the world, other than, you know, I sent in my absentee ballot. But where I do have it is in the neighborhood all around me. And I live in the ward in Washington, D.C., which has had the highest number of people test positive for COVID. I live in a place that is a very mixed income community where we have a lot of people who didn't have jobs before COVID-19, but many people who were living paycheck to paycheck, and those paychecks were coming from 2 or 3 different places. Many in the restaurant industry, that those jobs no longer exist. And so I've been for the last 6 weeks part of a mutual aid network that only launched 10 weeks ago, where really it's just thinking about how do you model a different set of behaviors and a different way of being as neighbors for neighbors. And, you know, mutual aid really is a critique of authority-driven and capitalist-driven models. It is the idea that there is no sense of judgment of asking for what you need and no sense of judgment of how much you can contribute. And I think that, you know, at this point, what we've been able to really build the connections of has been the most, you know, critical Maslow's hierarchy, like food, cleaning supplies, stuff from the pharmacy that people need to like function. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done in that space. And, you know, and the truth is, if we look at the network that we're involved with, and while we are working to correct this, one of the things that's come up for us is that the majority of our volunteers are white, who are the ones doing deliveries and making this happen. The majority of the people we're delivering to are not. And so this notion of like both how, as a community, are we seeing ourselves differently, but also how are we recreating the same types of dynamics, and how do we work together to change that that if you're going to do mutual aid, the people both volunteering and receiving should reflect the larger demographic.
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, you're speaking to something so powerful. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I noticed in myself today as I was sitting with the horrific and disgusting tragedies, that have unfolded in the last few days for the Black community, just feeling so overwhelmed by the systemic problems, and like, how the heck can I even start to do anything that actually matters? And I think what you're modeling so beautifully for us, the word that I was searching for at the beginning of our conversation that I couldn't remember was fractal. Fractal. So that when we take one little step in our inner community and start to shift things a little bit, or we reach out in a circle that's closer to us, then slowly we get the butterfly effect, right? And things change. And it's not up to us to solve all the problems of the world, but when we take one step closer, then other things have the opportunity to shift too. So I just think you're speaking to something so profound, which is, conversation by conversation, one act by one act. Yeah.
I think that's true. And, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier also, which is that, and before you can be in conversation with people about those things, like, it requires a lot of our own internal work. And which is a very nice, like, parallel of, the larger discussion.
Yep.
Sort of like, what's your sacred journey and stories, which that work is not external to us, it's internal to us. So
right.
When I think of I move in a lot of spaces with like amazing people of color, and one of my commitments has been like to partner thoughtfully with other consultants who I think highly of, who bring different skills than I do. And one of the things that's been kind of amazing in that experience has been that ability to like get to learn from and alongside and contribute to the work of friends and colleagues who have different lived experiences and different identities than myself. And that wouldn't have been possible had I not spent years, and had I not been continuing to spend years learning about all the things that as white people we need to learn to engage thoughtfully in anti-racism work. And I still make mistakes every single day. Really.
Yeah.
And also I think one of the things in doing that work has to be letting go of the fact that we will make mistakes, and then that, one of the works that often gets recommended to white people is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And part of it is like receiving critique about how we show up and being given feedback. That is a gift for us, because that is helping us undo what a white supremacist society has taught us. And we lose out, just as every other population, from the way white supremacy is structured.
Yeah.
But the scars it has upon us and the internalization of like a way of being it has upon us is different in the way it shows up, and isn't as brutal and vicious as it is for our Black and African American, siblings. And it isn't, but we give up part of our identity. One of the most profound ahas I've ever had was being told that like part of whiteness is giving up cultural tradition. It is giving up family history.
Yeah.
And one of my teachers from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, in their Undoing Racism curriculum, said this thing that continues to stick with me, and like I continue to like just like mull over, which is like the first thing that goes is your language, and the last thing that goes is your recipes. And I think about how much I stick to like with holidays and things like that, continuing to cook the brisket my mom and my grandma made.
Yeah.
But you know, I think there's truth because my grandmother was fluent in Yiddish, and you know, my mom knows a little bit of it, and I know none of it. And
Yes.
so, like,
Yes.
there's a whole part of culture and identity we lose as we sort of step into whiteness. And you know, as a white Ashkenazi Jewish person, you know, like that, our whiteness was bestowed upon us in the 1960s, basically. So that's how quickly this works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And until like each of us like look into and really spend the time like interrogating that for ourselves, questioning that, learning, like we're not ready to really step into having those conversations thoughtfully about like what do our communities need.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. To ask first, well, what am I willing to give up? What am I willing to interrogate? Yeah. Beautiful. I know that folks are going to have questions about resources and next steps. So I'm going to invite you to share anything you want, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
But I want to invite you too to share a little bit about your offerings and how you serve community and how people can find you and connect with you moving forward.
Sure. So I think that for me, the work I do is not with individuals. I do work with teams and cross-sector collaborations and organizations. My organization is called Optimistic Anthropology because optimism is a belief in the future, and anthropology is the study of, you know, humans and how we evolved. And
Such a great name. Such a great
thank
name.
you. I mean, half the world doesn't know what it means, but that's okay. It sounds good, and hopefully it sparks some curiosity and some questions.
I love it.
Which is in keeping with like me. So I have a website. It's optimisticanthro.com. And I do a monthly newsletter where I share like what's new on the website. I also I know a lot of people in social change spaces. Many of them are hiring and looking for consultants, and also run amazing kind of fellowships and accelerators that are fully funded. And so I do like a monthly roundup of all those types of things that sort of rolls throughout the month. And this is a time where I know there's lots of people who are looking for new opportunities. So I just wanted to name that.
Yeah.
But I also write about my work and like the connections I'm seeing between my work and the world, and my own thinking. And then the other place that's a little more fun, usually, especially when traveling will be possible again, is that I do share a lot on Instagram of my travels and what I'm learning. I use photos sort of as the beginning of the story most of the time to like share something culturally or historically or politically I'm learning through a process. Although sometimes I just take pictures of really pretty flowers or animals or things like that. So that's my personal Instagram. It's akgold11 because I'm Alison Kate Gold. And when I was young, I liked the number 11 a lot.
It's a good number. It's a good number. Yes.
And then in terms of resources, I mean, literally there's a million things you can Google around if you want a good lists of reading on anti-racism work. I think and also based on your identity. So I think there's different places to start if you're white. Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, is a really good one. I tend to be a more experiential learner than I am like a reading learner, which is funny because I read a lot.
Right.
But there are some great organizations that do training in this type of work. I mentioned the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They do a program called Undoing Racism, which I think is a really profoundly good 2.5-day introduction. I don't know how they're doing it right now, given it traditionally is like, you know, kind of an intimate in-person type of experience. And there's a ton of good organizations if you're sort of beginning your journey and orienting to racial justice work that are out there. For other folks who are Jewish, I mentioned in Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. I think one of the resources that they have that is really excellent is they, if you're interested in sort of learning more about the intersection between anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism and white supremacy,
Mm-hmm.
they have a wonderful sort of like 20-page PDF that's on their website that's sort of like, what is anti-Semitism? And there's a whole section of it that really looks at the intersectionality of the two.
Yeah.
I think is profound. And then I think the organization that like I've learned a ton from has been Race Forward, which is also affiliated with Color Lines, which is a big like publication
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
on racial justice work, and also for folks who work in government, it has the Government Alliance for Racial Equity. So looking at how to transform government systems, and you know, I just I think this is work that requires humility
Yes.
for everyone, and
Yes.
the recognition that a lot of the ways that we have been taught and trained to think about the world have a particular set of beliefs and ideas like built into them that,
Mm-hmm.
to your point, we have to be willing to like lose or let go of
Yes.
in order to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
But what I'll say is I am not an expert on racial equity. I'm a person who, as I've continued on the journey of learning and, you know, making it more central in my work, makes mistakes about it, talking about it thoughtfully and fluently every single day of my life. But just like every other subject, I think that there's a danger in claiming some sort of expertise, and I think there's a value in being a continuous learner and questioner within it
Mm-hmm.
as you get closer to creating the world personally and external to us that we want to create.
Yeah. Oh, Alison, thank you for modeling what it looks like to be an eternal learner and questioner. I think you epitomize that so beautifully. And thank you for all these resources. They will go in the notes so that people can continue to ask the questions and do the learning for themselves. It's just such an honor to be in conversation with you. And I'm gonna bring us to a close with a blessing. That comes from what's percolating for me from our dialogue. May we each have the courage and the humility to be able to step back and listen to the important questions. May we be able to receive the gift of feedback, even when it's hard. May we remember that work is a form of love in action, and to open ourselves to more and more invitations to connect with that love. And may we always be inspired by the deep questions that our soul is whispering to us or shouting to us, and have the patience and the openness to sit with the questions even before they can ever begin to be answered. Thank you. Thank you. That's so special. And I'm excited to see where folks feel sparks around this and kind of compelled to connect with you and with each other in new ways to continue to ask the questions and to listen to the questions themselves. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.